Welcome everyone for joining us today to the next steps in our conversation about exploring AI for the classroom. We're just waiting for everyone to join in, and while we do that, it would be wonderful for those of you who can to open up the free version of ChatGTP. We will be using that during today's session, and there'll be an opportunity for you to test drive some things in that space. So we welcome you to join us here today, and we'll be starting shortly. We're just waiting for everyone to join in. So again, if you're just joining us, welcome. Exploring AI for the classroom. We're really hoping that everyone can open up on another screen the free version of ChatGTP, and we will be referring to that during this session today. Just waiting for another couple of minutes until everyone can join us. So if you haven't already, please open up a free version of ChatGTP. We will refer back to that during the session today, and we'll be getting underway in a couple of moments. Yes, I've got one question about whether there will be a recording of the webinar. We will certainly be circulating the recording following on from the session. Okay, what we might do now is get started. So welcome everyone to Exploring AI for the Classroom. My name is Debbie Heck, and I'll be facilitating the session today. Chris, if we can move on to the next slide. What I would like to do is begin with an acknowledgement of country. I'm coming to you from Kabi Kabi land here on the Sunshine Coast. I would like you to reflect on where you're coming to this session from, and in particular I'd like to pay homage to elders this year, as our NAIDOC week this year was really about acknowledging the important place of elders in the community. I think you'll note Phil's just put into the chat the link to opening up ChatGTP in the for this particular session. It'd be great if you could do that alongside this. Chris, if we could go to the next slide, just to let you know who you'll be working with today. So my name is Debbie Heck, and I'm the Dean of Education and Tertiary Access here at the University of Sunshine Coast. And we have two other academic staff from that school with us today. Dr. Renee Morrison, who's a lecturer in curriculum and pedagogy within the school. And we have Sandra Elsom, who is a lecturer in technology education within the school. So it's wonderful that they're here with us today. It's wonderful to actually have the opportunity to come together for this session to explore what happens in the classroom. And if we move to the next slide, Chris, I'll give you an overview of where we're going this time. And this builds on the work we did in the first seminar in this series, where we actually looked at the ethics and academic integrity issues. And now we're moving on to thinking about how we're using it in the classroom. So, of course, I'm doing this welcome and overview. Then Sandy Elsom's going to lead us in a journey about lesson design. And then Renee Morrison's going to take us on a journey of looking at student-based tasks. And we're hoping to leave a fair amount of time at the end of the session for you to actually add questions and answers. Now, you'll find the Q&A function at the bottom of the webinar. And what we would like to do is open it up for people to add questions in as we proceed, and recognise that you can elaborate further on the same question or add a promotion to that question. Go, yes, I'd also like to know about that particular question, so that we can actually triage some of the main questions people would like to know about as we proceed towards the end of the session. So without further ado, Chris, if we head to the next slide, I'm going to hand you over to Sandy Elsom to get started. Thanks, Sandy.
Hi, everyone. Like Deb said, I'm a lecturer in technology education here at USC. So my usual audience of students is adults. I'm not an expert in ChatGPT or AI. I am an enthusiastic adopter of technology. And I would say, whilst I teach technology education, my qualifications are more in education than they are in technology. And I am also a current PhD student here at USC in education. And thought I would tell you that I am using the paid version of ChatGPT. So I'm using ChatGPT 4 for everything that I'm talking to you about here. And Chris, if you would go to the next slide for me, please. So I recently spent a semester as a guest lecturer in one of our partner universities in Germany. So here at UniSC, like I said, I teach technology, but in Germany, I was teaching critical thinking to a group of German and international students. So as well as Germans, I had students from Bhutan, India, Morocco, Turkey, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Syria, and Ukraine, ranging from 18 years up to around 23. And I wanted to leverage the intercultural knowledge of the group by using differences in culture as the context for their learning. And I'd also been asked to see if I could perhaps teach the students a little bit about using AI for their learning. Slide, please. So these students were in their second semester of university, and in that particular university system, they don't start to learn academic research until their third semester. Now, I normally would start a topic with an academic definition, but in this case, that wasn't really appropriate for the students. And also, I found that ChatGPT could give me a much clearer definition, a much more understandable definition than the academic definitions that I would normally use. Now, clearly, there are reasons why we might choose to use academic definitions, to introduce the theorists in that space. But what I was aiming for in this case was just that the students should be able to understand the concept. And so I really felt that these two types of definitions complemented one another really well. Chris, if you could click. And in showing the students how they could use AI in their learning, I then showed them that they could translate anything they didn't entirely understand into their preferred language. And I asked the native German speakers that I had in the class to critique this translation. And they told me that that last phrase, that "und ein schlauer Lerner zu sein," is a little bit out of context. It's probably not what you would say there, but otherwise it was understandable. Next slide, please. So I really love using ChatGPT for definitions. This is one of the best things I've found for it so far. But it's not just languages. We can customize our text to our audience in a variety of ways. So in this case, I'm using the same definition of critical thinking that I had before, but I've customized it for a 10-year-old child or for a grandparent. And I'm just going to read you a section of each of these. So this is ChatGPT's definition of critical thinking for a 10-year-old child. Critical thinking is when you use your brain to ask questions and think carefully before you decide what you believe. It's like you're putting your ideas through a test to see if they make sense or not. For example, if someone tells you that eating carrots will make you better at video games, instead of just believing it, you'd ask questions like, is that really true? How do carrots make you better at video games? Is there any proof? And the second one for a child's grandparent reads, you remember the days when you'd get a chain letter and you'd just throw it in the trash, right? Well, imagine that chain letter could spread to millions of people in seconds and could influence how they vote, what they buy, and even how they treat other people. That's the internet for you. Now, as a person who is the age range of a child's grandparent, I do remember chain letters and I do remember the criticism that chain letters got. So that is a perfect explanation for somebody of my age. The next slide, you will see that the better we know our students, the more powerful this tool can be. So the example I've given you here is if I know that a student or a group of students play football, for example, then I can ask for an explanation using football analogies. Or perhaps in your situation in a classroom, you could link the learning to something that they're learning in art or in music or to an upcoming school event that everyone is talking about. So to do this, I'm simply saying to ChatGPT, please explain X using analogies from Y. I'll just pause for a moment so that you can have a look at that before we change. Okay, Chris, thank you. You can also use AI, of course, to create anything, a song or a mnemonic. Here I ask for it as a rap. So I imagine you could put the kids in groups and let them make adaptations or create music for this or make up a dance to go with it, whatever you think is the thing that will engage your class. At UniSC, I give my students complex, wordy explanations of important topics, and I have them work together using ChatGPT to generate better explanations. And I give them prizes for the best explanation and the funniest explanation. And by the end of the activity, we've heard a bunch of different ways of explaining these important topics, and they didn't even realize they were learning because it was so much fun. And Renee is going to shortly talk to you more about using AI in the classroom. Next slide, please. So I'm sort of taking you through this through the class as in the order in which I developed it. So I wanted to do an activity with them where I had a bunch of controversial statements or contentious statements, I suppose. And in the activity, people moved to the left or the right-hand side of the room according to whether they agree or disagree with that statement based on their cultural upbringing. And the students' feedback confirming or rejecting these statements drove a really lively discussion. So I'll just sort of talk you through what I did there. I first of all asked ChatGPT to generate a list of 30 topics about which people's opinions or practices differ significantly according to culture. And I always like to ask ChatGPT to output a lot more than what I need. Then I can pick and choose from what it's given me. I can add ideas together, and it prevents me from only seeing the limited number of ideas that ChatGPT generates. So I generated the topics, and then I realized that it would have been better if every statement started with should. So I asked ChatGPT to rephrase them so that I could easily copy and paste them. And then I remembered that I was working with people for whom English is their a foreign language. So I had the questions rephrased so that they'd be understandable by people who speak English as a foreign language. And for any ESL teachers out there or people who are working with non-English speakers, you can actually tell ChatGPT the level of English, German, whatever language is that you want. It does understand that. And then I asked it to give an example of 2 or more cultures that might disagree on that topic. So what I was looking for there is something that I could start the discussion with. So, and you can see in my sample output there that one of the questions was, should gender determine specific roles within a family? And the example that ChatGPT gave me is in some conservative Middle Eastern cultures, gender roles may be more defined and traditional, while in Nordic countries there is a stronger emphasis on gender equality and shared responsibilities within a family. So I had some background that I could talk about, and I could also draw the students in because I was using specific examples that related to their experience. Slide, please. Now, these students are used to having to take minutes for the class. So each lesson, someone is volunteered or somebody volunteers to write notes that are later shared with the rest of the class. And the usual process is that the students take the notes in class and then they tidy them up at home and then they email them to the lecturer who checks them and posts them in the Moodle, the class space. The way I approached it was to ask several students to take notes at various points in the class. I made sure that there was always 2 people, but they were overlapping, and I asked the note taker to change regularly so that people weren't missing the class. And then at the end of the class, I just said, right, email me your notes, because of course they're all on their laptops or their iPads or whatever. Email it straight to me. And then I put it into ChatGPT to generate an overview of what had happened in the class that week. You can see the left shows you what the student notes looked like when they came through. And I've given you my prompt there in yellow. And I would stress to you that it took me quite a while to get a prompt that I was happy with here. In my first versions, I let ChatGPT choose the headings. And then I decided that it made more sense that the headings in the class notes were exactly the same as the headings that I had in my lesson structure on my slides. So I did do a little bit of messing around here to get it right. And Chris, if you click, we'll see what comes out in the end. So you can see a beautiful outcome we ended up with. And in this particular case, I didn't want ChatGPT to add any additional information. I didn't want it to make anything up. I just wanted it to tell us what happened in the class, and that was really effective. Okay, Chris, let's go. Okay, what I decided to do was I wanted to create an essay writing workshop. They don't learn essay writing in Germany the way that we do in Australia. They don't even, as I understand it, at school learn that standard introduction, body, conclusion. So marking essays can be really difficult. And of course, I wanted to make it easier for myself and for them. But I really needed to squish about 6 weeks of learning into a 75-minute workshop. So I wanted to just focus on the essay structure. I didn't want them to have to do any brainstorming or researching or referencing, just to understand what the parts of an essay are. So I used ChatGPT to generate the content and gave the students the content so that they only had to focus on structuring it. So this would be the equivalent of if I wanted you to create a formatted report in Microsoft Word and I gave you the document that was unformatted and you had to do the headings and label the tables and add a contents page and all that stuff. So ChatGPT was able to create this content for me really quickly and easily. So I'm going to just walk you through what this process looked like. So first of all, I used ChatGPT to just generate the overall topics, and then I had it narrow it down for content, and then I had it do a sample essay. So I'll show you these. And Chris, if you can click the slide, please. Thank you. So I always use topics, subjects related to chocolate when I'm teaching essay writing so that I can justify bribing the students with chocolate to get their attention. So here's what ChatGPT came up with for me. And once again, there would have been a number of different topics, but I selected the ones that I thought were most relevant to the students that I was teaching. And then I put the students into groups, into 6 groups, and I allocated each group a topic, and I got them talking about this general topic first of all, so that I could then explain what context is and how we write context and how we write an introduction. Slide, please. Then for each of those topics, I had ChatGPT generate an idea of what would be included in those body paragraphs. And what you're seeing here relates to the specific structure, the theoretical framework that I was using for this. It's Germov and Poole, if anybody is interested. So I didn't want, it's quite complex. I didn't want my students to have to think of what historical factors impact chocolate and colonialism. I just wanted them to know how to write, linking sentences. So I gave them this, and then I gave them time to discuss it. So they had something to start with. And to create this, I explained the model that I was using to ChatGPT, and I asked it to suggest topics that might fit those broader topics that I had on the last slide, so that I had a breakdown like this for each one. And because I have used this model many times before for different purposes, I was also able to give ChatGPT examples of what that might look like. So exemplars are really helpful when you're prompting. Slide, please. I also gave them an overall essay to refer back to. Now, I really want to stress, I know that people worry about plagiarism, and you could look at this and look at that, it wrote a whole essay, but it really didn't. It actually took me quite a long time to generate this sample essay. I had to really coax it out of ChatGPT because what I think is the appropriate structure for a 5-paragraph essay is not necessarily what ChatGPT thinks is the correct format. So I had to do a lot of generating and copying and pasting and moving things. And, once you work in ChatGPT for a little while, even in the paid version, it will lose some of the earlier context and forget the instructions that I'd given it. So um, this wasn't easy, but that said, it maybe took me 2 or 3 hours, and that's certainly a lot quicker than it would have been if I had had to create this myself. And the references are made up, so that didn't matter for me that these references were made up. It's not relevant, it's just to show the structure of an essay. Slide, please, Chris. So, based on my experience of using AI to create this course, I created a set of guidelines or a framework for using AI that I then shared with the students in the course, and I'm going to share it with you now. So this is how I'm using AI. And the first step is when you're looking at the output from a generative AI tool is to ask yourself where that information has come from. So is it your writing that you just asked it to rearrange, or is it a straight summary of a text that you've given it? Or did you ask the AI to do research and find information for you that you didn't already have? So it's really crucial to understand whether the output has been based on pre-existing content or if the AI has added new information. I'm sure you know that ChatGPT does not have direct access to specific sources, databases, or knowledge or anything beyond what it was trained on, and it will tell you that, of course, as well. But if the output is just a new arrangement of the input, then you're pretty safe. You have to check it, of course, and that's step 2. So the second thing to think about is that you need to critically evaluate the information that has been presented to you. So assess the truthfulness of the information against your pre-existing knowledge. So let's say you've asked it to summarize an article. I'm assuming that you actually read that article and you can confirm that that summary is in line with how you understood the paper. Step 3 is to consider the consequences of that information being wrong. So, what are you using the information for? If I ask ChatGPT to create a recipe for me and it ends up not being very tasty, then there's really no great harm done. But if I'm using it to write a letter to council to get out of a parking ticket and it makes up the legislation, then there is the potential for harm. It might cost me the fine. If I use made up information in my research, it's academic misconduct, so it could cost me my job. So at this point, you need to stop and consider if you're okay with that information being inaccurate. And if you are, you're good to go. If it's not okay, if the information is inaccurate, then you need to move on to step 4. And step 4, of course, is to verify the information. So look for additional sources and references to support the information that's been provided by the AI. If AI quotes a paper, then go and find that paper and read it. It might not exist. ChatGPT makes up references all the time. If it doesn't know something, it makes it up. It doesn't say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't really know," unless it's specifically been trained to do that because of the nature of the question you've asked it. However, I really want to stress that it can help you with search terms and understanding those complex texts. So you can tell ChatGPT the sort of thing you're looking for and say, what search terms could I use? And of course, you can have it write things at a year 10 level for you as well as for your students. I usually go with year 12 level and then back it up to year 10 level if I'm still having difficulty understanding. Um, Ultimately, however, you're responsible for the content that you produce, regardless of whether you're using AI or not. So I recommend keep your standards high. My personal strategy is that I'm using AI to do tasks that I technically could do by myself, but they would be really time consuming, and I don't feel that I would learn anything by doing that, drudge work by myself. So I hope that you have found this helpful. I'm going to pass over to Renee, and I will speak to you again at the end of the seminar to answer any questions that you've put in the chat. So thanks.
Thanks so much, Sandy. As introduced earlier, my name is Dr. Renee Morrison, and I am also a lecturer at the University of the Sunshine Coast. Like Sandy, I do not consider myself an AI expert. I think with the pace of change, it's dangerous for almost anyone to make that claim. But if Sandy is an enthusiastic adopter, I'll call myself an intrigued and excited adopter. So a lot of what Sandy discussed was ways in which you can use AI as a teacher. We're starting to transition now, and I'll hopefully should be able to share as a practitioner some ideas about more student-based tasks. Slide, please, Chris. So the first thing I would stress is just a reminder that there are plenty of AI applications and platforms specifically built for educators that go beyond ChatGPT. And that's not to suggest ChatGPT is not useful. It is. Some of these, for example, I would encourage you to go and have a look. Some of them, of course, are paid. Often it's a minimal fee, maybe $7 a month, something like that, but a lot of them have free trials. So you could go and decide for yourself how these can be used and whether they're useful or not. I'll just give you a bit of an example. I myself would be cautious of any that claim to write lesson plans, but it might give you a basic structure. So something like Education Copilot claims to be able to design course and lesson plans. ClassPoint, possibly more useful and practical in that it will look at a PowerPoint that you give it, and it will design quiz questions based on the content of your PowerPoint slides. You can preset the objectives and even focus on particular cognitive verbs that you want the quiz to assess. But obviously ChatGPT is a large language model. It is text generator. Today, you and I are going to talk a bit about both text generators and image generators. Bard, of course, is Google's version, I suppose, of ChatGPT. Some other options there are Dreambox, Smart Sparrow, and Newton. These can be used to differentiate. And I saw in the chat function, someone did ask about differentiation. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more soon. Some of them focus on sort of numeracy and literacy, some on all subjects, and some on STEM subjects. Some other tools will also speak with familiar software to you, like Microsoft software. So there's, I don't think I have the icon, apologies. There's a platform called Zapier, which can seemingly help automate some of your more administrative tasks behind the scenes. Thanks, Chris. I wanted to show you, talking about differentiation, I wanted to talk about some software and applications that you're already very familiar with that are using AI that you might not be aware of. So PowerPoint, everyone's probably very familiar with PowerPoint. What you may not know is that in Office 360, you can now do real-time captioning that translates. So you might have a student who has English as an additional language, someone that's literally just landed in Australia, or you might be a language learning teacher. What you can do is you simply go into slideshow, captions and subtitles, and in real time, whilst you're speaking, it will translate your English, I presume, or whatever language. I think there's 50 input languages and 50 output languages available. So I would recommend you go and try that. Here's an example of artificial intelligence built in to an existing application that you're already familiar with, and really good for differentiation. Next slide, thank you. So as discussed, there are both text generators, and they've probably received more media attention and even educational attention than image generators. Here are some of them: Midjourney, DALL-E, and Canva. Again, Midjourney and I believe DALL-E are paid subscriptions. Canva, there is a free version that I've been playing with. What I've got in the bottom right-hand screen there is taken from a user guide from DALL-E. So even if you are not necessarily planning to use DALL-E specifically or to use the paid subscription, I would recommend, and I know Sandy does as well, finding as many resources as you can about prompt engineering and about the different types of ways you can generate images and text. Yeah, so, and there's also, we would recommend that you become part of, be it Facebook, messenger boards or communities online that focus upon AI and developing your AI skills. One of the cool things that many of the images that you'll see on my slides today have been created with Canva and through what's called text to image, whereby you write text and try and establish a picture from scratch based upon your text input. One of the things I'm going to stress today, next slide, thanks, Chris, is that some of the fears, I believe, next slide, thanks, Chris, some of the fears I think surrounding AI is a lack of ownership and starting to question, well, did the students create what we're asking them to create? Questions of authenticity. These are fair questions and concerns, but one of the ways I would suggest to get more out of AI and to help your students is to not necessarily be limited by the program's original intent. So I'm going to give you some ideas of how you could use text generators, not necessarily to create text or to think about skills associated with text, but to develop creativity. On the flip side, using image generators to help develop literacy. So I think probably thinking outside the box will enable you to utilize AI and AI applications in ways that perhaps you hadn't thought of, and that really stop or at least reduce some of those concerns about student authenticity, because we're not asking students to create text and that's the output you're after. We're actually using text generators to create something else and establish different skills. I know that's all very contextless at the moment. I'll give you some examples. So all that to say that picture and graphic-based creation tools are not just useful for art or design. Text generators should not only be used in English or where the text output is ideal. Thanks, Chris. Next slide. So here's an example where you are using, for example, Canva, which is an image generator, but you're not focusing upon creativity or art or visual art. You're actually focusing on literacy. So you could say, for example, you ask your students, I want you to design an image that does this, or that looks like this, or that creates this. There's now, I understand, I haven't obviously scoped the entire version 9 curriculum, but here are some example content descriptors that would sort of fit and see this activity fit for purpose. There's a Year 1 English curriculum content descriptor that says students understand that there are many different ways of asking for information. So by virtue of Canva being a bit of trial and error, you could ask students, I want you to create a picture that encourages students to recycle, and it includes a koala. By virtue of them working through, this is the image I got, this is the image I wanted, you're actually encouraging literacy development. You could even give them a hand-drawn picture or get their partners to draw something by hand, an original composition, and then ask students, all right, let's go into Canva. I want you to come up with something as close as you can to that image. Here you are focusing on their prompts and on the literacy that they're using within the prompts through trial and error, rather than focusing on the output. It's the process that you're focusing upon. You could also say, okay, here's 6 prompts that I've written in Canva, and here's 6 images. I want you to try and match which goes with which. So in Year 3 English, it says discuss text in which characters, events, and settings are portrayed in different ways. Again, this sort of activity acts as a springboard for you to discuss those things. Which words are used to portray which pictures? Thanks, Chris. So again, I'll just stress that there is a lot of media panic and even moral panic surrounding artificial intelligence. And while some of these are warranted, I think it's incredibly important, whether or not your school lets you bring AI into the classroom and students to use it or not, to be cautious of harnessing the potential of AI, as well as being cautious of the potential problems. So I've said here, yes, that chatbots like ChatGPT, have the capacity to undermine traditional norms of authorship and creation. But my question might now be, well, should creation continue to be our #1 goal? What I did is I looked at the Year 4 English Key Learning area, and I looked at the content descriptors. I was looking for the word create. Now, out of the 28 content descriptors in Year 4, just 3 relate to create. So again, if it's about shifting the goalpost potentially. Do we want students to still be able to write? Absolutely. Is creation the only goal, creating text the only goal in English? No, and nor should it be, and nor has it been. Okay, 3 out of 28 content descriptors related to create. Often also those references to create talk about create and edit. And I'll talk to you in a moment about some activities you could do where you're still getting them to create in a sense, but you're focusing on other skills as well. Thanks, Chris. So I guess what I'm also saying is I don't want people to think that that text generators will naturally detract from students' literacy skills, nor will image generators inherently detract from people's creative skills. So here's an example. Forgive me, going to move myself out of the way. Here's an example where you have a content descriptor, create and edit literary text by developing storylines, characters, and settings. So I've focused on that developing characters idea, and I've popped in, admittedly, maybe a bit of a unique idea to begin with, but I've popped into the free version of ChatGPT, version 3.5, I believe it is. Help me develop the character of a workaholic kookaburra. And I'll let you have a read. In the green is the output, and RE, that's me. Whilst you're having a read, I'll just stress that naturally, you are not going to get your students to submit, okay? Their final product is not what the ChatGPT is producing. Rather, this is giving you ideas, maybe phrases, maybe I like that it says, let's feather out the details. So it starts to give students some potential ideas of metaphors. And again, by virtue of it not being written in a story initially, this is just giving students some ideas for, as you can see in the content descriptor, developing characters. Just one click. Thanks, Chris. I think I have another one. Terrific. So what about the editing? Okay, we all know that students need more and more practice with editing. Why not get ChatGPT to create a text for you that already has mistakes in it? And you could naturally ask them, I've said incorrect capital letters, incorrect comma use, and incorrect tense, but obviously you could negotiate that depending on the weaknesses of your students. You could even, given that this took me 2 minutes, you could even generate, okay, well, this group of students, several texts, this group of students are having trouble with tense, this group of students are having trouble with XYZ, and ask ChatGPT to create a text that has these particular errors for them to then find. So here the focus is upon their editing skills less than their creating skills. Having said that, you'll see that I said create a 2-page newspaper article. So this would make sense if, for example, you're doing a newspaper unit. Thanks, Chris. Just like I think you can develop literacy with image generators, I think you can also use text generators to develop creativity, which you might not have thought of. So in the top content descriptor there, it talks about using media arts concepts to construct representations that communicate ideas which might challenge expectations of specific audiences. Okay, so I've put into ChatGPT on the left there, suggest some ways that a television advert could represent smoking as dangerous to help challenge typical teenager expectations. Now, how you use this text is up to you. How your students use this text is up to you. But in my thinking, it was like, okay, well, my students, I'm going to get my students to develop a television advert. This is a planning activity. This is a preemptive activity where you're getting them to generate ideas. They might dislike all of these ideas, and that in and of itself could be another activity. Why does ChatGPT not successfully understand the media arts concepts that we're getting at? So yeah, just a different way. Rather than always thinking we have to teach media and art with image generators or literacy with text generators, if you think outside the box, I think it will help extend the capacities, but also limit some of the risks. Thanks, Chris. Just a single click. In the just click for me, please. Thank you. In the bottom content descriptor, we had generate, document, and develop ideas for artworks. And I think it talked about using visual arts concepts like line. So here I've put into my ChatGPT, compare the use of line as a visual convention in the McDonald's logo with the Subway logo. Again, this could generate a whole host of activities. Do you want students to judge the efficiency of what they're doing? Are you just getting them to think about developing their own fast food restaurant or hopefully healthy food restaurants design, and you're getting ideas about line use for that logo? Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so hopefully by now you're starting to get an impression that there's a single prompt and a single generated image versus text can be used for a whole host of different activities. You could say to students, I want you to create an image that blah, 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 blah. If they're using Canva, for example, where they have to go from text, they write the text to create a brand new image based upon the text prompt. You could be teaching them, for example, about prepositions. Maybe in this particular one, I'll tell you, and these were created in Canva by myself. I was hoping to have a robot of a similar size in my mind to the globe, and being separate to the globe, looking down upon the globe. So looking down, above some of those prepositions. And of course, there's a whole host of ways you could ask students, all right, well, I want you to use 10 different prepositions, show the robot in a different position to the world, globe, or what have you. Whilst they're doing this, and whilst they're realizing, oh no, that text prompt didn't give me what I wanted, as I certainly experienced, I think the first one, when I asked about the robot looking down on Earth as a globe, I think that's what I wrote in the ones in the middle of the screen. You can see that it understood that I wanted, inaccurately, and understood that I wanted the robot to be part of the globe. So meanwhile, by virtue of you looking at your prompts versus the outcome, you're learning about writing and about giving instructions. You're also problem solving. And I mentioned before when we were speaking that this is really computational thinking. As soon as you realize, no, that's not the image I was thinking of in my mind, you can ask students through metacognitive activities, all right, what did the computer think? Which are the words that led you astray, that led Canva astray, and the like? So I'm trying to remember what my prompts were. So I realized in those first two smaller images, no, that's not what I want. So I changed, instead of robot above Earth as a globe, I changed it to robot looking down upon an Earth globe, getting closer. And then the third option, which is the far right, I wrote robot looking at planet Earth from above it. So I still am not perfectly satisfied with these images, what I had in my mind. So you can see that that text to image generation has a whole host of possibilities, and students, both the metacognitive possibilities, but also literacy learning, instructions, above and beyond just learning how to use the software itself. Canva can be a bit clunky. So like with any software, sadly, my suggestions would be just to have a bit of a play. Thanks, Chris. Now, I wanted to talk to you about last time, for those of you that attended in the last webinar, we learned about the fact that ChatGPT and other AI can hallucinate. They can make things up and get things wrong. Literally, in the space of a month, this activity of mine has had to change, because you used to be able to tell ChatGPT in particular, irrespective of what prompt you gave and what answer it gave, you used to be able to say several times, that looks wrong, and it would change it. Now, literally in the space of a few weeks since we've been preparing this, this webinar, ChatGPT has learned, and now it doesn't function in the same way. So I thought I'd pop up some images just to show how fast AI is learning. Literally in the month that we've been planning this webinar, the algorithms have changed, or at least the machine learning has changed. Have a go, especially if you're in a highly technical field. So if you're in maths or science and you ask about the potential chemical compound of something, if you say that looks wrong, it often, although it seems to have caught on more recently, it will often change its answer. In this way, you're forcing a hallucination. And I think that can be useful, if it still does it, to show students how flippant and sometimes inaccurate these technologies can be. Thanks, Chris. So we'll have to do this very quickly. You might recall that earlier in the session, Deb asked you to open a, can we just remove the poll just for a moment? I'll let people have a read first. Sorry, team. If you do have ChatGPT open, fantastic. What I'd like you to do, and I'll read it out twice, is put this prompt in. It's at the bottom of the screen, and we're going to see if everyone gets a similar or the same prompt, because arguably we should, but you don't necessarily. Write 2 sentences on the statistical likelihood, and if we don't get this today, still do it. We can do it later. Write 2 sentences on the statistical likelihood that the next astronaut to enter space is left-handed. I'll just give you 30 seconds. I'm conscious of the time. See how you go. I'll read it out one more time in case you don't have this screen open with your ChatGPT tab. I want you to prompt ChatGPT, the free version 3.5, with write 2 sentences on the statistical likelihood that the next astronaut to enter space is left-handed. I'd like to show you just how flippant ChatGPT can be. So just, Chris, can you click for me once? The first time I entered this prompt, this was the result. Okay. Now you'll see there that I've asked, what about minor differences? Let me just find my prompt list, apologies. In the second time I entered this, Chris, I'll get you to click just once for me. I asked the same prompt, except I used the letter to instead of the word spelt TWO, and left-handed, I put a hyphen in instead of no hyphen. You and I know these are not substantial changes. These should not qualify as significant enough to change the reply, and yet they do. Now, you might say, well, Renee, that first response and the second one are very similar. It's talking about roughly 10%, approximately 10%. There are slight differences. But look what happens with the third one. Thanks, Chris. On this occasion, literally, I didn't put, instead of write 2 sentences with a capital W for write, I took the capital W away, and I actually took the word the away as well. So again, definitely not cognitive changes that should have made a difference to the reply. And yet, in this one, you'll see, seemingly the exact same prompt, they don't mention a percentage at all. So I'll get you to pop the poll up. Out of interest, I'd be really keen to see how many people got 1, the first reply, the first result, how many people got the second or the third. And apologies, maybe we should have had an option something else. I think this is an important activity, and you can do it with your students just to show how flippant the technology is. And whilst it's not necessarily that any of these results are inaccurate, it's important to recognize, yeah, exactly that ChatGPT does not understand the difference that using a hyphen in left-handed or not using a hyphen in left-handed, that shouldn't change the response. So pop your polls in and we'll have a look. I'll check that whilst we'll keep moving and let you know the results as we go on. Thanks, Chris. Next slide. So we're very aware that some schools will allow you to use AI in the classroom and some will not. So what do you do if your school's saying, no, we don't want the students to use it? Thanks, Chris. You could be, especially if you know they're using it at home, there's certainly, it's certainly unlikely that they won't know what ChatGPT does by this stage. So in different areas, you could get students to debate or discuss some of these topics, okay, which gets to the heart of the ethics about using AI. Thanks, Chris. Next slide. Just to add to what Sandy's excellent work earlier, you can also use both text and image generators to create resources and activities for the students, but on your computer at home. You could design cue cards, for example. Maybe you're asking students to, you're focusing on parts of speech or safety in the lab. You don't want to spend hours coming up with those cue cards. Let Canva or a similar image generator do that for you. On the right, you could get ChatGPT to create stimulus texts like we did before with the editing. They can shorten texts, make existing text more child-friendly or age-appropriate, more simple if you're dealing with students who have English as an additional language. And yeah, we already did the creating text. So again, thanks, Chris. I hope you found some of these ideas useful. It's just about, I guess, resigning yourself from the fear and making sure that you use and allow your students to use these AI programs in ways that they weren't necessarily designed for. I think that's a great way of extending their use. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Renee. And so we're hoping that people, if you're intrigued by some of these things and that kind of thing, it'd be really useful if you wanted to have a look at some of the postgrad programs that we have that move into this space. If you do another click, Chris, you'll see that there's a range of those in the area of education, as well as in the area of cyber security, forensics, and data science. So thanks very much for joining us. We're really keen to also point out, moving on, Chris, that there is going to be an event on the 14th of November for people who might like to explore further aspects of the way that they might engage in research in this space and continue postgraduate study. In the meantime, we're hoping people are adding into the Q&A some of the answers that they have, or some of the questions, sorry, that they have. And it might be useful in a moment if we can share the results of the poll so people can actually see the answers that came up. We had a few people commenting they got a mixture of answers and that kind of thing, but I think it'd be interesting for people to share that. And if you have other questions, please add them into the Q&A section. Sandy, I think I might at this stage hand over to you just to cover off on those couple of questions that came up around the reliability and those kinds of things, about the difference in paid and unpaid and those kinds of things. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. I thought you might like to know that the paid version of ChatGPT gave me almost the same answer, but said, as of my last training data up to 2022, approximately 10% of the world's population is left-handed, et cetera, et cetera. So I did not know until this very moment that the paid version of ChatGPT now goes up to 2022, not 2021. So that was interesting. Okay, now I've just got to find the Q&A again. There it is.
Whilst you're looking, Sandy, I hope people can see my apologies. Just to let you know that we had 62% on that first astronaut result. Hopefully this is on other screens. 29% on result 2 and 9% on result 3. So you can see like the near identical prompts are getting quite, I mean, you could argue, okay, well, the first and the second weren't hugely different, but that third one didn't even reference a percentage. So just FYI, that's a fun activity you might want to do with your own students. Sorry, Sandy.
There you're right. Okay, so Esther has asked about how many parameters can ChatGPT work with, and we don't really know, Esther. ChatGPT is a black box. We don't know what goes on inside it. I would say you can probably match a particular grammatical concept, but you might just need to play with it for a little while. I find that when I'm prompting, I actually did a course online called learnprompting.org. You can find it easily by searching for that. I couldn't get very far in it because as soon as you get past sort of intermediate prompting, it does expect that you have some coding knowledge that I didn't have. But what I find works best for me in prompting is a lot of context. So I talk to ChatGPT like I'm talking to my research supervisor. I explain to it, this is what I'm trying to do. This is what I've done in the past, and this is what worked for me. So I give it a lot of information. ChatGPT also works well with examples or exemplars. So you can say, here's an example of what I'm looking for. And another really useful phrase is, let's go step by step. And then ChatGPT will break it down really deliberately for you. Andy has asked about if you would use AI-generated images in an academic presentation, would they need to be referenced somehow, or are they considered the prompt as intellectual property? You can't. There is no intellectual property on AI-generated images unless you make significant changes to that yourself. So let's say you created an image in AI and then you did a lot of editing into it in Photoshop or something for your business or whatever, then you could copyright it. But as the AI-generated image, it cannot be copyrighted. I personally think that that it is a courtesy to your viewer to note that an image is AI generated. And that is, like I said, purely my personal opinion. And Chris has asked, can ChatGPT be used and referenced as a research source? And no, absolutely not. It's not a research source. In fact, I like to get my students to do an activity where we bring up our phone and use the generative text, you know, when you just keep pressing next. And if you would, unless you would use that as a research source, then you shouldn't use ChatGPT as a research source as well. ChatGPT's job is to give you an answer that sounds right, not to give you an answer that is right.
I might hand over and ask Renee whether she can answer the question from, I think it's Esther.
There's one from Nick as well that is from Renee as well. If you could answer that one, please.
I think the Esther one has been answered. Hang on, what's the question? Sorry, Deb.
I answered Esther's, but Nick's is for you, Renee. I don't know the answer to that.
Schools are choosing to allow. Yeah, it's the fear of ownership, Nick. I think part of it is media and moral panic, and there is a historic, history repeating itself. There's often, almost any time there's new media, be it the television, be it the radio, heaven forbid, there's been a media panic. I think the predominant fear here is surrounding questions of authorship. And again, that's only a problem if you're asking students, for example, or allowing students to use text generators to create text, and if text is the end goal. As you and I have looked at a little bit today, text generators can be used in a whole plethora of ways where the actual text generated isn't the goal, it's process, not product. Clearly there'll be other schools, there'll be other reasons schools claim, but that is, I suspect, the most predominant reason some are fearful of allowing students to use it.
The other reason that many schools have put limits around this relates specifically to the age group of the students, and each app has a series of terms and conditions for use of that particular app. And so if the parameters fall outside of the age group, then I think some schools are using that as to mitigate risk, to actually identify that this is appropriate for teachers to access, but not for students to access. And I have heard that there are quite a number of schools that are okay with teachers using it in a whole group context, but for those areas where it's not age appropriate, where the app is actually in the terms and conditions says that it's for 13 years and up or 16 years and up, then it's very important as educators that we actually honour the terms and conditions that the app is being offered to us for. Okay, I'm just conscious of the time. We've only got a couple of more minutes, so if I could just move on to asking people in the chat, if you, in the Q&A, if you have any ideas of future seminars that you would like us to think about putting together, topics or aspects of AI that you think would be useful for us to explore in the new year. We will be in a context where in the new year the federal government are finalising and taking to the next ministers meeting the actual documentation around a bit of a process and a way forward that will be going Australia-wide. So whether people would like to spend some time actually exploring that in the new year. And also it would be useful if anyone has any specific feedback about this session, you can add that either into the chat that will come through to us directly or into the Q&A. If we could move on to the next slide, Chris. So again, thanks very much for coming along today. We hope that this has sparked some of your curiosity about this area and possibilities that you can explore in the coming weeks as the year closes down, offer you opportunities for doing and exploring things in different ways that you might not have imagined, and that you can take that into your planning for assessment for classroom activities that you can work with young people. If you're still intrigued, we would really love you to come along to our session on the 14th of November, explore our postgraduate coursework programs, and certainly look forward to talking to you in future. If you have any other ideas, and apologies as well to those people who are unable to have all the questions answered in the session today. We very much appreciate your time and realise that everyone's very busy. So hoping to end pretty much on time. So thank you, and you will get a copy of this sent out to you all so that everyone will be able to review it later on. Thank you very much from myself, Debbie Heck, from Renee Morrison and Sandra Elsom. We really appreciate your time and energy this afternoon as we draw to a close. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Deb.